Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I have the privilege, of speaking with New York Times and USA Today bestselling author Maureen Johnson, and the fanboy that lives within me couldn't be happier. Maureen is the author of the new YA mystery The Box in the Woods, the first standalone novel to feature true crime aficionado and amateur sleuth Stevie Bell, who first appeared in the author's phenomenally popular Truly Devious trilogy. But you probably already knew that. Maureen, who holds an MFA in writing from Columbia University, more on that later, has written across genres, and her earlier works include the Little Blue Envelope, Scarlet, and Shades of London series. Additionally, she collaborated with John Green and Lauren Miracle on Let It Snow, which was adapted by Netflix, and with Cassandra Clare and Sarah Reese Brennan on The Bane Chronicles. The Box in the Woods finds girl detective Stevie Bell at Sunny Pines, formerly known as Camp Wonder Falls, the site of four grisly unsolved murders in 1978. With her besties Janelle and Nate and boyfriend David at her side, she vows to solve the crimes once and for all, even as past and present collide in devious and deadly ways. In addition to receiving starred reviews from Booklist, Bookpage, and Kirkus, The Box in the Woods was selected by Cosmopolitan, People Magazine, Publishers Weekly, and Indie Next as recommended reading. Reading The Box in the Woods gave me all the feels, reminding me why I fell in love with books in the first place and why I still love them now. So talking to Maureen Johnson was a total geek out moment. I enjoyed it, and I think you will too. Hey everybody, welcome back to Central Booking. I am really excited today to be in conversation with the beloved best-selling author Maureen Johnson, who wrote the Truly Devious trilogy and also has a new standalone novel, The Box in the Woods, coming out on Tuesday, June 15th. Welcome to the show, Maureen.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So, all right, I have to fanboy for a minute and just tell you how much I love this book. I've always really enjoyed, young adult, and it was sort of my entryway into the world of mystery, suspense, thriller. And I tend to read more adult books now. But reading this book really brought me back to what made me fall in love with the genre to begin with. So I'm totally geeking out, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, I even broke out my magnifying glass because I looked at your author picture and I was
there it is.
Just way cool. But yeah, this is a real fun one for me to do because this really did take me back, 25-ish years to when I was really getting into books. And I love YA, so it's nice to have a reason to come back to it. And this book is really interesting because it's a novel that revisits characters from your Truly Devious trilogy, including, of course, Stevie Bell. But you now have, her and her friends, and you put them in a new standalone situation. So can you talk about, why you wanted to revisit them, but in sort of a standalone situation?
Well, I always, it was always part of the plan is that I wanted to establish a detective because I grew up, not just grew up, but have always loved reading detective, specifically detective fiction, where you meet the detective and then you go with the detective through all the cases. So I wanted to make a detective and then have that detective continue from there. So it was always part of the plan. There was really no pause between doing Truly Devious, the trilogy, and this. I started it like the next morning or something. It just was seamless.
So that's the way it gets done.
And the next one, I've already started that one. So we're just going right on.
Oh, that's awesome. And I wanted to ask you too, because, you meld backstory sort of into this very naturally so that people who haven't read the trilogy, they get a feel for what it is, but it doesn't spoil it. So, you can go back and read the first three books without saying, oh, I already know this story. So can you talk about how you approach blending that backstory so that you're satisfying new readers and old readers without giving it all away?
Well, Truly Devious is 3 books, and it establishes Stevie Bell as a detective and the school that she goes to, Ellingham Academy, and a cold case that happened, took place in 1936 that Stevie wants to solve. So the idea is that Stevie in those books, I'm doing a lot of hand stuff tonight. There's a lot of this. Stevie solves a major cold case from the past. And all I really kind of needed to say was she is a detective. She solved something. She went to that school. And these are some of the people she knows from that school. So Well, if you want to read the box, then what you don't have to read Truly Devious, but if you have, you'll certainly know them well. But I just wanted to, I feel like that's what you see in a lot of detective fiction, is that you just kind of touch on the fact, like, here's our detective, this is what they do, they detect, this is, and you don't have to be too heavy-handed about it, because we all basically understand the contours of a detective.
Sure, sure. And so let me ask you, so in this new book, Stevie is invited to attend a summer camp. It's called Sunny Pines. It used to be known as Camp Wonder Falls.
Yep.
And it's the site of this, murder. 4 counselors were killed way back in 1978. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about the setup and, how it allows for a collision of both past and present events, but also the people who connect those events.
So I'm just going to open up the book for a second, because I'm really map obsessed. I use maps in my writing a lot, and I often have them created. And so one of the things you'll get in this book is a map of the 1970s map of Camp Wonder Falls as it existed at the time, and where it exists with relation to this town. So this takes place, the camp is part of a town called Barlow Corners, Massachusetts. And everybody from the town knows everybody else. Most of the teenagers work at the camp. So while these events took place in 1978, a lot of the people are still around. Like, it's not that long ago, so they're adults now, but they were counselors, or they may have worked at the camp. So there's still a lot of personal connections to people. So by introducing, when Stevie gets in there, it's not like a case from 1936 where basically nobody is around. She has actual witnesses to talk to and people it still really matters to. So Barlow Corners and the people of the town really become a major part of this story, which is something she's not really used to. Because Stevie is not always great with the people skills part, and she actually has to now deal with people that have lost somebody, which is hard. Also, just looking down, because I just got these are my little Camp Wonder Falls patches that my publisher made that you can actually put on your clothes, and I'm super psyched about. So,
oh, that's awesome.
They were just because they were right here. I was like, plus I got a camp patch, so excited.
Well, come on, who wouldn't want that?
I like a patch.
Yes. And so I have to tell you, I was feeling all kinds of nostalgia. I already mentioned, that it sort of brought me back to my earlier in life reading. But what I love about this too is, it sort of is reminiscent of the old horror movies from the 80s, like Sleepaway Camp, Friday the 13th. I think you even mentioned both of those in the book. So I wanted to ask you, one, are you a horror buff yourself? But also, what do you feel is the importance of nostalgia in your storytelling, especially considering, how popular young adult books are with adults too, either who read them with their children, who just simply enjoy them because they love a good story.
I'm not a horror buff. For the purposes of this book, I did watch Friday the 13th and Sleepaway Camp. Friday the 13th is so much more boring than it's just like, okay, like it does what it says. It's like, there's going to be this many deaths. And then like, you're like, okay. And that's a movie that's on a schedule. It's like, look, we're going to give you a death every 8 minutes. Like, you're going to get, he's stabbed. No, he blew up. Like, it just kind of ticks along. And I thought it would be scarier than it was. I watched it on a plane and I was like, oh. But I spent a lot of time kind of screenshotting the decor in the back. Sleepaway Camp is just a movie that has not aged well.
It's true. We watched it recently.
Oof. That is, I will say about this, so the trope about the camp movies of that time is that basically everybody goes to camp. It's like, hey, I'm here to have a party and a lot of doing the sex. And like, they're always like, they're wearing little tiny short shorts and they're always doing the sex. Everybody in Sleepaway Camp, the campers appear to be anywhere between 12 and 25 years old. Like, they just, they don't seem like camp age. They seem like fully grown adults almost. Not like young adults, but adults. It's real weird. So I'm not really I kind of did my due diligence with those. I was like, okay, like I get it. And mostly I listened to, there's a podcast by Matt Gorley and another guy called, the podcast is called In Myers We Trust. So it's these two comedians that watch every single Michael Myers movie over and kind of break it down in detail. And it's very funny. So I did a lot of my kind of absorbing all the tropes of,
Sure.
you know, he's a killer and he lives in a lake or whatever, which is all I really took away from it. And then occasionally, like, and eventually he's in space. So but in terms of nostalgia, I just like writing period pieces a lot. And you know, 1978 is not really that long ago. But it's certainly long enough that it has a kind of a kind of historic flair to it.
Sure.
Basically, anything that doesn't have cell phones or the internet is like all your mechanisms for getting people out of danger. Basically, all of those movies stop working the second you add a cell phone. Like they just don't work anymore. Like you just call for help, you're fine.
It's true. I think Lois Duncan said when she, she did some rewrites when they were republishing her books, and so all her characters had to like drop their phone into a lake or something because.
I'll tell you something. I love her, but those rewrites, I got new copies with the rewrites, and then I sent them back, and I was like, I will only read the originals of those because the rewrites are, no, you got to read the originals. Where everybody's like, I'm in my pantsuit. When I dial a phone, it takes 5 hours. Hello, and your phone is this big.
That's right, and people are like, what is that? People don't know.
What's a rotary phone?
I know, what, you have to like, rotary? What?
Seriously, it took like a full minute to make a phone call because it was like, and then the dial went back.
Sadly, I remember that all too well.
Yeah.
I remember at my grandparents' house, they had like one of those things mounted to the wall where you actually had to like pick up the earpiece. Like nobody actually used it, but it was like, what is this artifact relic? And now that is like what the rotary phone is, or even like some of just the touch phones. It's just strange.
Boop, 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 boop.
I know. What? So let me ask you about Stevie too. She's a really, really great protagonist. I love that, she's admirable in the fact that she's smart, she's strong, but you even mentioned yourself that she's not without, vulnerabilities or shortcomings, which makes her very real. So I wanted to ask you, what you're hoping to capture in your characterizations of her that your readers might recognize and relate to, such as, like you said, the people skills, the sense of anxiety that she has, that type of thing.
One of the way you get into Ellingham Academy, where she goes to school, is that you have a thing. Everybody just applies with their skill or their interest. And most of the people, they play music, or they are into engineering, or they're into art, or they're into, they have a kind of established thing that you can tie to a major.
Right.
Hers is that she wants to solve a crime, which is kind of not a thing. And she's got that inferiority complex. She's got the, what am I going to do with my life? Everyone else seems to have everything figured out except me. But I do have this one thing and I'm super interested in it. And when she gets into her thing, she kind of blocks out everything else. And she doesn't quite sometimes know how to friend. She never knows how to girlfriend. She never knows how, she's just kind of like, I'm just trying to do my thing. I'm just trying to concentrate on this one thing. And she's also got anxiety. She's like a lot of people. I mean, she has a lot of qualities that I have, which is the kind of single focusedness of that when you get into something and you're like, I'm not even paying attention to anybody else or anything else. And also I think that she just, the part of the way she deals with anxiety is she wants to fix things or make it right. And that's what I think the crime solving means to her, is it's like it's righting the world.
Right.
It's making things right again. It's establishing some kind of order in a world that may seem crazy.
Right. Sure. I love that. And I was thinking too, I would have anxiety just being in the woods because the scariest thing to me is like poison ivy. So
Mm,
I'm like, I just want to be in air conditioning with my book, and that would probably be my single focus. But
yeah.
as soon as I knew she was going to camp, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't even do like nature's classroom as a kid. No.
And the ticks.
Yeah. Between the poison ivy and the ticks, like, and the snakes
Mm,
under the floorboards, I mean, bad news.
I was not a camper. I was not a camper. I was not an outdoor kid, so you know.
Where was I? I can appreciate that. I do appreciate that. And let me ask you too. So I love that, Stevie goes to camp and she's sort of there as a counselor, but she's really there to investigate and hopefully solve a cold case. And she gets to bring her friends with her. So she has her BFFs there. So she has Janelle and Nate, and her boyfriend David is, proximally there as well. He's not actually at the camp, but he's able to connect with her. So I just wanted to ask, what bringing in those familiar characters allows you to, how does that allow you to raise the stakes or the suspense of the story in ways that aren't necessarily related to, who done it, why done it, how done it, because it sort of broadens the box that you get to work within.
Well, she certainly has to work on her life skills at the same time as she's working on crime skills. She's got to remember how to be a person, how to be, how to balance that you have to be a human being and also do this thing that you want to do and have an interest and concentrate on the thing you want to concentrate on. Also, she needs them. She can't, she's good at solving things, but you need many tools to break, to solve the problem in terms of research or a kind of engineering or just ways of solving the problems. You need other people. So she needs her friends. And so she gets to bring them along because they get to be camp counselors, one willingly and one slightly under duress.
I think if I was going to camp, I would probably be the Nate character. Like,
Nate is all of us.
Yeah. And, I wanted to ask you about him specifically too, because, it's interesting. He's written a book and he's really struggling to write a second book. And there's actually a kid at camp who's read his first book and is really trying to like forcing him into a position to write that follow-up book that he's really struggling with. And I was just wondering, if you could talk about what it's like to write a writer character who is faced with those struggles of, all right, I have a book under my belt and how do I do it again and again and again, even if it's just one more time.
It's a real easy because I'm just using actual thoughts of my own. He's really just everybody I know that's ever written a book that's like, well, I guess that's me done. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how anything works. Well, I had a good run. Anyway, oh no, people are going to ask me for stuff. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I never knew what I was doing. Why did people think I knew what I was doing when I don't know what I'm doing? Maybe I can hide. Maybe I can fake my own death, burn off my fingerprints. Like, I'm just saying that. Have you ever thought about seriously maybe giving yourself a minor break of your own arm because you was like, well, if my arm is broken, then I can't meet the deadline. Don't break your own arm. No, come on. I could just like easily just break it a little tiny bit. Do not break your arm. Do not do it. Just saying. I'm not saying that's ever occurred to me, but I'm not saying I did not think about it.
Fair enough. I find that I've become very domesticated when I'm a deadline and like all of a sudden I am compelled to do the dishes, do the laundry, make the bed, and it's just any excuse not to write.
I once painted a ceiling.
That is commitment to non-commitment. Yeah. I love it.
I didn't even have a roller for a ceiling thing. I made one. I crafted it with tape and a broom. And I was like, I got to repaint this ceiling right now. I did not have to repaint the ceiling, but it got done.
I think you were my hero. I thought we were heading in that direction, but I think I know for certain now.
Yeah, I was like, what? One time in my terrible little apartment in Queens, I literally ripped up the floor with the kitchen floor with my bare hands. No gloves. Just ripped it out on a winter's night at, I don't know, 10 o'clock at night. I was like, the floor's got to come up. And it was so gross, this floor. And I was like, I just got to do this right now real quick. I didn't know what was underneath that floor. I didn't ask permission to rip up the floor. I just ripped it up with my bare hands. I was like, well, I mean, I could be working right now, or I could go rip up the floor with my literal bare hands. It's not a good idea. There are staples and things in there that you should not be touching, but oh yeah, and I rented a paint steamer, or no, I borrowed a paint steamer from my friend. I was like, I gotta steam the paint off these cabinets. This paint's been on there since the 1930s. It's probably entirely made of lead, but I'm gonna heat it up. I'm gonna heat it up and scrape it off without a mask on. That's gonna be smart. I'm gonna do that right now. Don't do any of these things.
This is some really good life advice.
I'm just saying that when authors hit a certain point, things happen. Like that's when they're like, and so I built a patio. Like that's what happens.
That's very true. You know,
And that's where Nate comes from.
love him, love it. I feel like I regret every project I ever start because I'm good at like the demo, but then when it comes back, you know, comes around to fixing things, putting things back together, that is not me.
The demo is wonderful.
Yeah, it feels good. It's very cathartic. You know, this could be a nonfiction book for you, you know, all the ways that writers cannot write and do other things. Just putting that out there.
One time I had a fellowship where I got to stay a month in a Scottish castle and write for everything was paid for. You just had to show up to the castle. And one of the other writers I was there with was this BBC rugged journalist type that always wore like a flak jacket, did serious things. And the first 2 days there, he asked the caretaker, he's like, "Can I have an axe?" And I was like, we were in the woods, like the woods of Scotland, where there is nothing around, nothing. And so he got an axe, and I was like, what is Nick doing with that axe? And every day Nick would disappear for an hour. He would pick up an axe and go. And I was like, oh no, Nick's going to kill us. And the last day he's like, "Hey, Johnson, you want to come out with me and see what I'm doing with the axe in the woods?" And I was like, I've lived long enough. Sure, why not, Nick? And so I went out with Nick into the woods, and he had been just chopping. Like there's a felled tree that was blocking the path. And every day he was chopping that tree and clearing a path. And he said to me, he's like, "I love it. It clears my head." He's like, "The most fun I ever had was when a friend of mine said, 'Hey, do you want to help me destroy a shed?'" I was like, "I gotcha. Now you're not murdering people."
No, spoiler alert. I mean, you're still here, so.
I mean, he didn't murder me.
Well, why would he? I mean, you know.
There's actually a number of reasons, but luckily I was okay.
And we are all thankful for that. But yes, there's something to be said for the healing powers of destruction.
Yes.
And so I want to ask you too, I mean, sometimes some of my favorite parts of reading books are reading dedications and acknowledgments. And this book is actually dedicated to Billy Jensen of Chase Darkness with Me fame. And he saw that last week and posted it on Twitter, which was really cool. He seemed to be really surprised that he got a dedication on your book. So I was just wondering if you would mind, you know, telling us why you chose to dedicate this book to him.
I've met Billy a couple times. I got to host an event he did here in New York, and he was kind enough to host an event I did out in LA for the release of The Hand on the Wall. And because I'm stupid, I got to LA and I have this long dress on, and I wore a pair of new shiny sneakers that I'd gotten, like, oh, my cool new kicks, I'll wear them. And then I'll walk to this event because I don't need a lift. I like to wherever I land in a city, I like to walk. So I walk in my shiny new sneakers with my beautiful little dress swinging along my ankles. Little did I know that as I walked, it had kind of rubbed the back of my foot. Like when you first get new shoes, it kind of scratches at the back, and I was bleeding, and it was swinging. The hem of my dress was swinging across the blood. And when I arrived at the Barnes and Noble, my skirt was covered in my own blood. And I was about to go in and see Billy, and I was like, I need to explain why I have all this blood on me. So he was really nonplussed by that. He's just like, okay. Like I was covered in blood. It was not okay. But I was like, look, we'll just make it work, man. Like I just got a lot of blood on me. It's all good. But the reason I really like Billy is that he really has always, he's famous now. And like, everyone's like, Billy Jensen, he's, you know, super cool guy. He's like 17 feet tall. But he has always done the work of trying to be a victim's advocate. He spent his own money, took his own time, always he's always done the work. And one of the cases he's working on is actually somebody that lives not too far. Oh, lived. He died a long time ago, but lived in this neighborhood. So I think that's pretty cool. So I just think he is like him. He's the real deal. He's the person who actually is got interested in crime and is actually out there helping victims and survivors. So that's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And I'm sure, if he saw you covered in blood, you probably didn't even have to explain it. You could have just said commitment to craft, and he would have been like, all right.
It was a lot of blood and it was all over my dress.
Mm.
So I feel like you should explain why you've arrived at your own event covered in your own blood. I think the first thing you explain is that it's yours.
That is, yeah, fair point.
But it was definitely splattered. It really did look like I don't know. It wasn't great.
Sounds
But
memorable.
look, I it's a classy profession and I like to maintain an air of elegance at all times.
And me never.
Yeah, it's just part of my thing, you know. I'm just like covered in my own blood is not even the worst that I've turned up at my own events. So, who am I kidding? One time I turned up with a dog, not even just a dog. We found a dog in the road that had gotten away on the way there, and we're like, "Oh, well, we just gotta have to take this dog with us." We took the dog. That was a good story, though.
All right, so next time, you find yourself walking to a book event covered in blood, if you bring a dog with you, no one will pay any attention to
No,
the
they'll be like, something went
dog,
down, but
just for future reference.
something happened.
That's right. So let me ask you too. So, and you write about this in the acknowledgments, but are in New York City, and you wrote this book during the height of the pandemic in New York, of all places, which was incredibly hard hit. So, can you talk about writing in those circumstances and how that, affected your process, if at all? I'm sure there's something to be said for escapism, but I would also assume
Yeah.
it can be very difficult, getting yourself into a place where you can write freely with all that going on around you.
It was certainly it was very bad around here. Um there were temporary morgues around the neighborhood. So, and there were a lot of sirens and we saw it was pretty grim and it was pretty terrifying in the beginning. I'm not laughing. I'm just laughing out of nervousness because it really was very scary in the beginning because I was like, I guess we're in it, like we're locked in and I know it's here already, so I guess we're probably going to get it, so we'll just prepare for that day. We did not get it. We were very lucky, but it was in the buildings, it was all around. And I couldn't really do any writing at first. Like for the first month or so I was mostly just trying to score provisions and clean things and like kind of set up our new life where my husband was suddenly working from home as well. Like we were just suddenly like, okay, we're going to build a little cabin inside this apartment. We're going to do all our things in here and I'm going to wash clothes in here. And we're going to have a nice bed. Like I'm going to get a camping table and we'll eat here. And we still eat at that camping table. That has not stopped. It's in the middle of the living room because my husband is still working from home, which means we don't have a table still. So, but after that, something in my brain was like, well, it's time to write, really. I was really kind of fumbling along still. And then what really changed this book for me was that Cassie Clare, who writes Shadowhunters, is a good friend of mine. And it was by the summer and she's like, why don't you come, like get a car and come and stay. You could stay, like we have like they have a kind of outbuilding, like a barn, like you could stay in the barn.
Sure.
And I was like, I was scared to leave the city, but at the same time, it was safe to kind of take a car directly to like a empty house.
Right.
And they're like, we could see outside. And we're like, okay. So we drove up and I saw the outside again and I saw like a pond and we sat under the trees and I remembered being outside and like in the heat of the summer and the sound of crickets and all those things. And then the book kind of got restarted. I'd been working on it, but I think it was that trip that really allowed me to kind of feel like I remembered what outdoors was and
Sure.
normal things were again, because we really hadn't been outside very much. We would walk the dog, but we didn't really get to spend time outside. So, and it's a very outdoorsy book that's like summertime smells and noises and water and rain and all those kind of summertime sensations.
Right. Yeah, it's very sensory, but I'm wondering, how do you write that when, you're stuck in a house and you probably barely remember those things because it's been so long
Yeah.
since you've seen them. But it sounds like that was a pretty good escape and sort of a reboot, much
It
needed.
was it was like getting my brain rebooted. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, and people. We hadn't seen any people.
Yeah.
Like we had to talk to people. We had to sit outside. I saw a bug. I'm like, look, a bug. It was great. So that's how it was. That's really how it happened.
Sure. And so to circle back all the way to the beginning, when I was saying how, this book sort of brought me back to my initial love of reading. I grew up with like Nancy Drew. I loved Nancy Drew, and then sort of like R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike, and then eventually Mary Higgins Clark. But the thing that I really enjoy about your books is that they are so diverse and inclusive, because you go back and you read a Nancy Drew and you can still enjoy it, but you can also pick up on all of the things that you didn't pick up on the first time you
Right.
read it, like the fact that it's pretty much an all-white cast and there's stereotyping and things of that nature, and not much diversity at all, or when there is diversity, it's not always in a good way. And I'm talking particularly the earlier, Nancy books, like the 30s, 40s. But I just wanted to ask you about that, because you have, a populace in your book that is very representative of the actual world around us and the people who populate our planet right now. And it's done in a way that's very sensitive, that's subtle. It's just like, this is how it is, without much explanation. But I just wanted to ask you, why it's important for you to present that ranging, population in your book, and the approach that you take to doing that.
I think it's important for the reason itself on its face is that is people. That is people is a quote I just said. That is people.
And it's true.
That the world is not one type of person. And we, for too long, that is the narrative is around certain types of people. And I just try to do my best. And each time I sit down to write something, I just try to think about it again. Like, hey, is there an angle that I haven't really, because we all, we just, as I think that I always want to make sure, am I doing my best? Am I trying my best for everybody? And that's truly, I think, all that anybody has ever asked is like, can you try your best? Can you think about it and try your best? And it's like, well, yeah, of course I can. Like, but it's also when you get to see all your readers and you see all the diversity of their experiences of all types, to try to remember all those readers that you've met along the way and go, hey, that makes me think of so-and-so or so-and-so, and just try to picture them all in your head and go, are they going to find something for themselves in here? Would they be disappointed if they didn't see something? Would they, and you can't do all things, but you can do a lot. Like, also just a shout out to, in terms of past books that I was obsessed with, it was The Westing Game, which I think holds up very well in terms of those kinds of issues. It's one of the rare, and that was published in 1978. And it's one of those cases where I'm like, yeah, she actually thought about this stuff way back then. And it's, fair play. Like this, it's one of the few that you're like, don't have to cringe against the wall. The past is a cringy place.
It is. I mean, it's like you said too. I mean, you go back and you read books and you see how, people were stereotyped or just completely ignored or marginalized. And, talking about going back and watching the old movies that, terrified us when we were 12, and now you realize that they're just laughable. You watch them and you don't jump, you don't scream, you just think, oh my gosh, this is all, ridiculousness. So it's nice when you find those rare things that do stand the test of time. And I think that what I really liked about your book is just, everything was very natural and there wasn't a lot of explanation. It was just people in the world as it is today. Whereas I think so many people feel the need to, over explain, over describe. There's not really any of that here. It's just people being who they are, which I thought was pretty terrific. But you were talking about, your young readers. And I did want to ask you about that. What do you see is the responsibilities and also the unique joys of writing for a younger audience versus an exclusively adult audience?
I'll tell you that they're certainly more advanced, I think, than a lot of the adults. Truly, their understanding of things like gender fluidity, consent, they're light years ahead of adult readers, and that's great. I mean, I feel I'm a very optimistic person in general, and I feel like all I've ever gained from dealing with young readers is good stuff. At their how the ideas of inclusiveness that are fueling this generation are fantastic. So they're also very flexible readers. They tend not to lock themselves into one genre. They may read everything in that genre, but they will go over and be like, I will also read this or that. They will follow you around to different genres. They're not so locked in to what they think they do or don't like. I feel like when you get to adults, a lot of times you get adults who are like, I read books about a guy on a submarine, a woman on a bridge, and she kisses a guy who came to town to open up coffee shop. Like that's it. That's what they read. I read the Amish romance where they through the celery field and they have a thing at the dress barn buying sewing supply. It's very specific, strangely specific. And I feel like younger readers are flexible. They will also let you know what works, what doesn't work. And I like the directness.
Right.
I appreciate directness. And so it's I never knew that I would ever write for this age group when I started writing, but once I did, I was like, oh well, this is great. Like, I really love doing this.
Yeah, and it's like this is where you're meant to be, you want to be, and people seem to like having you here.
Or they can't get rid of me. I've been around for a long time.
Hey, I'm like, whatever.
You become part of the scenery. You're like, I'm still here.
Sure. But let me ask you that too, because you had mentioned something that I wanted to ask you about, which is, you have written pretty broadly in other genres or subgenres, and you've kind of ended up in young adult mystery. Can you talk a little bit about, the transition, but also, what makes for a good story regardless of the genre that it's in? Because I think if you're a good enough writer, people are going to respond to your story, whether it's a romance, something fantastical, or something grounded in mystery like the books that you're writing right now.
I was an obsessive mystery reader from the time I was around 4. And I got every mystery my little tiny grubby hands could get her hands on. I burned through them all through my teenage years. Then I got very serious. I went to write. I have an MFA. I went to, so I went through that very serious process where they beat the love of reading and story out of you. Truly, I had professors. I did dual degrees in writing and theater in my graduate work, which is insane. But don't do that. But I had one real bigwig professor was like, I hate story. There'll be no story. Like, they never taught story. They never taught story in theater or in the writing division. I was like, we never had a class on story structure. I don't understand it either, but that's just the way it is. I went through a lot of school to never have, and I had one theater professor who was like, story. He was like taking me down the path. He's like, you got to learn story. So I felt really clumsy.
Right.
A lot of times I understood story just from reading a lot of books, but I had never been taught, if in many ways I'd been taught to avoid story.
Right.
And that But except that I got very annoyed with that when I was in grad school. I was like, why are we trying to, what are you doing? You're doing this for you and not for the audience. And the idea that story is a bad word is so misguided. It's so absurd that it makes me angry. And it's one of the reasons I'm constantly trying to talk people out of getting in the face.
Right.
So I felt like I never knew what I was doing. But I know exactly, I'm a writer and I know how to write, but sometimes I always felt story-wise, I'm like, who knows? So I feel like you learn to write each book as you write it. And it took me a long time to get around writing mysteries because I loved them so much. And I knew them so well that for some reason I didn't want to do them because because you think that you can't do the thing you really love. I don't know. I don't know why I avoided it.
Oh, that's hitting close to home. Huh.
Yeah, like somehow like it was too good for me or something.
Right.
I don't know. But I was like, it's the thing I can tell you backwards, forwards, upside down, sideways, like chapter and verse. So that may have been some sort of MFA hangover that's like, how dare you? How dare you?
I know, and whatever you do, don't find joy in your work.
I got a lot of sass about MFAs.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate. You know, I know people who have MFAs. I know people who do not. I've seen friends come to blows, you know, based on what they see as the merits or not the merits. I know people who've completely lost, you know, their voice and confidence because everything they thought they knew got undone and they couldn't get it back. But it's interesting to get that perspective.
You
know,
just send them to me. I'll talk to them. I'll be like, hey,
yeah,
you don't need that.
Right. I'm going to send you in.
Yeah. I feel like my consulting practice should be like I should open up some sort of like specialized thing. It's not a private detective. Just come to my office. You're like, I got someone who wants to get an MFA. I'm like, all right, give me their name and address. All right, put the money on the table. Show up at 9. Hey,
you know, this book thing doesn't work out. There's a great
open up. You get an MFA? Open up the door.
And you save so much money. I mean,
yeah,
you can buy more books.
Seriously, it costs so much money.
It surely does. All right, last 2 questions for you because I know you have things to do on this fine evening.
I'm just amazed my dog hasn't barked. That's 90% of it.
I was like, that's good news or not good news? It could go.
Oh, it's good news. Like she is full of beans. So.
As am I. So last 2 questions. So sometimes, you know, aspiring writers tune in. So I always like to, you know, of course, ask the crafty question. But in terms of a writing or creative life based on your own experiences, what would you say is the best advice that you were ever given? And then the best advice that you were never given and had to learn for yourself throughout the process?
I don't know about the good advice that I was given. I'm sure it was out there. Because they didn't really teach, it was never really advice based. I would definitely say the best advice I could give you is to be very wary of advice because you will learn to write your own way and you will write your own way and you will learn to write the thing that you're writing by writing it, which isn't to say that anything anybody can tell you is wrong. But I do tend to find that people that are like, you do it this way, like you don't ever really listen to them because they have no idea what it is you're writing or what you sound like or how your brain works. Or we all write differently. So by the nature of that, they have to be wrong about it, that they don't know. I mean, some people could give you a good hint, like you seem stuck, this might help you. That's different. But people are like, this is the way it's done. And this is the way it works. And this is the way it's going to happen. And nobody knows that. That's not a thing. So if anybody comes to you and they're like, I know everything, and you do this, no, pay no attention.
I like that. So be wary of advice, which I think is actually very true because you are your own mold and we are all our own individual molds.
We all teach ourselves how to write.
Sure.
That's really how it happens. So
it's true. So, okay. So the good advice is, you know, sit your butt in the chair and just write something because yes, no writing happens if you don't attempt it. But other than that, be wary of writing advice because it may not fit your needs.
Yeah. And don't give up. Like, just don't give up. You're going to write terrible things. Don't worry about it. That's part of the process.
I say writing terrible things is better than writing no things, right? Because you can always make them beautiful later.
It's not even that. It's literally part of the process. You must write badly. Everything we first start, it's always bad. So if you're not, you have to do it. You don't have, there's kind of no way around that. So if you're writing badly, you're fine. Don't worry about it. You're good.
Awesome. I will be hearing your voice in my head every time I sit down. And of course, I have to ask you, last question. As you said, pretty much as soon as you finish this book here, that you got right to work on the next one. So I'm wondering if you would mind just giving us a little bit of a teaser about what comes next for Stevie and her friends.
It's a new Stevie Bell, new location, maybe in a different country. But aside from that, because it's so new, I can't say anything else, but it is another Stevie Bell.
Awesome. Well, something to look forward to. And in the meantime, people have to go right out and pick up this book, The Box in the Woods, June 15th. You must read it. You will fall in love with it, because I did.
You don't have to, but it's nice if you do, and I hope you like it. But it's not like a law. It's not like you're going to get in trouble if you don't.
That was much more diplomatic. I can say it and nobody will listen to me, but you'll say it more diplomatically and people might actually take you up on it.
You might like it. I don't know.
I think you will.
Don't feel pressure.
It's a book. It's not going to hurt you.
It's not going to hurt you. Probably. It's not a man trap. Don't worry. It's not a man trap.
It's true. Well, thank you so much, Maureen Johnson. This was real thrill for me, and I really appreciate you taking the time out. But I suppose I should let you, walk the dog now.
Honestly, it is genuinely a miracle that she has not been barking and chewing on my leg. So thank you so much.
Pleasure was all mine.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.